listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Donovan Woods with the Fuels Institute. I'm joined by
Jeff Leonard with NACS.
Well, you know, Jeff, we are really interested in seeing what we have to talk about today because in the past, we always looked at hydrogen fuel cells as a sexy new option for passenger vehicles, but we're actually seeing more traction taking off in the heavy-duty market. I wonder why. Well, we are joined by Skype by our two guests who are going to help us really find out more about what's happening in the hydrogen fuel cell market, in the heavy duty market, and really overall. And our first guest is James Cass, the fuel cell business analyst at Toyota North America. And our second, also joined by Skype, is David Park. He's the fuel cell infrastructure coordinator at the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donovan.
Appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for making the time for us. Now, again, I mentioned how my first thought about hydrogen fuel cell or just fuel cells in general has been passenger vehicles like the Mirai, the Toyota Mirai. But I'm actually hearing more and more about it as an option for heavy duty. Is that accurate?
Yeah, maybe I'll go ahead and start and jump in here and appreciate the question, Donovan, because certainly it's quite an interesting space, right? Light duty is kind of a sexy thing. You think of, the other technologies out there. You see the Tesla, you see these other EVs that are, powerful, have this performance, but you really don't think of heavy duty when you think of zero emissions and how you're really going to solve really a big problem from a greenhouse gas and particulate matter perspective. And so it really, as Toyota, I think we see there being a huge need, first of all, whether that being the ports of like the LA and Long Beach area or really throughout the globe as well. But also just a huge opportunity for fuel cells because the ability for them to scale to that level and that size of vehicles. Yeah, certainly I think an interesting topic and happy to dive deeper as we move forward in the conversation today.
And one of the things is I've been to enough of these auto shows over the past couple of years where different things have emerged as a potential new fuel. There's been things related to compressed natural gas, liquefied natural gas. I've seen the Mirai at a couple of these auto shows, EV, dual fuel, you name it, diesel and traditional gasoline coming back again. What are some of the reasons that the first initial focus is on consumers? And I think there's just a natural tendency that you look at, consumers, there's 300 million possible sales, as opposed to light duty or heavy duty, where it might be fleet or might be much less. Is there a tendency for the auto manufacturers, James, to kind of look at things like, okay, where's the big market? Where can we make the big splash? Or is that what happens with new fuel kinds of vehicles, or is it something more where it just felt like the best opportunity?
Well, I think there's a few points to that, and obviously one of them, Toyota is a car company and not a heavy-duty truck company. So from our perspective, we're starting with what we know, and certainly I think that makes sense from that perspective. But also, there's really a few other parts to this. One of them being the policy aspect. So obviously, right now, there's a lot of interest in cleaning up the light duty sector, and that could be as far as zero emissions mandates, which California is very strong in that. There's a number of other states throughout the U.S. that are following that as well, and you even see even more in specific cities or even full countries throughout the globe with all these targets to have fully zero emission vehicles by certain dates, whether 2030, 2050, kind of ranges depending on how progressive those locals are. So I think policy is certainly driving that, and the heavy duty space is a little bit harder to shift as far as getting new consumers used to a new technology. When you're looking at the heavy duty space, you're talking about somebody trying to make a business and make money with their vehicle as opposed to just commute and go from point A to point B and really make a statement of their personality in a lot of ways. So the cost is also a big piece of that. You won't have fleets converting over to a newer, cleaner technology just because they want to, because they need it to pencil out at the end of the day as well. So between the policy and the cost coming together, you can really innovate in the light-duty space. And as Toyota, we're trying to now bring that fuel cell innovation that we've been developing for now over 20 years and seeing how we can actually bring it to other applications to help, again, kind of make the biggest impact with the scale that we have from light-duty and bring it to heavy-duty as well.
And Don, if I could jump in, At the partnership, we've initiated the market. The market was initiated with fueling stations in around 2012, and then the introduction of the commercial vehicles or light duty vehicles, I should say, in around 2016. But now what we are facing that issue of scale, as James mentioned, and from our perspective, light duty is going to drive the economies of scale on the power plant side in terms of the volume of fuel cells manufactured, which should drop the price of fuel cells. And then heavy duty will drive the scale of the actual hydrogen fuel. And as we get to scale on the fuel side, that price should drop. So it's a very synergistic match between light duty and heavy duty.
So David, let me just make sure our audience knows, because I know who you are and I know what the partnership is. Can you give them just a brief overview of what the California Fuel Cell Partnership is?
Yes, absolutely. The California Fuel Cell Partnership is a consortium of manufacturers, both vehicle manufacturers and fuel manufacturing supply chain, both on the fuel production side and then on the related equipment side. And then we also have governmental agencies such as the California Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission on the government side. And then we also have some NGOs. And we work as a common voice to develop this fuel cell marketplace, both on the vehicle and the fuel production distribution side. Being such a nascent market, coming as one voice, all these industry players, is a very powerful stance to initiate and now scale the market.
And also California, it's 1/8 the population. So what happens in California really does affect the rest of the country. If we were talking to the Montana Fuel Cell Partnership, right, we'd be interested, but the impact would be far less, because it's a considerable amount of population that can be exposed to these vehicles, can be exposed to the idea of what is possible with zero emissions, and move that forward, and then it just comes further east. Is that? I suppose that's fairly accurate in looking at how it's happening in California and how it will affect people in the Midwest and on the East Coast. Was that a fair assessment, James?
Yeah, I mean, really from this perspective, California is actually the largest global market for fuel cell technology as well. We have now almost 5,000 just Mirai on the road, with over 6,000 total fuel cell vehicles on the road here already. You have, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 in Japan and kind of a handful of the rest in Europe and some other markets. So even from a global perspective, not even the U.S. perspective, it's very large in terms of certainly fuel cell technology. Now, obviously, batteries have been around a little bit longer and have more development, and so they're a little bit more ubiquitous and more balanced throughout a lot of the globe. But still, California is very strong in really anything that's the zero emission mobility platforms.
And Mirai, that's the Toyota hydrogen car, and that means the future, right?
It does. It actually directly translates to future in Japanese. That's correct.
Yeah, our CEO likes quoting this futurist, William Gibson, who says, "The future is here, it's unevenly distributed." And what we see in some areas is far more advanced than others, and certainly what we're seeing in California is far more advanced than other areas of the country. So what are some of the things that are going on in the marketplace that are really gaining traction and have potential to move across the country beyond California? And I'll leave that to David.
Yeah, Donovan, I'll just jump in quickly, and then I'm sure James has something to say. But what we're seeing is the sales of light-duty fuel cell vehicles is driving the marketplace. Every time a new retail station is opened, they have immediate traction because there is such demand in the marketplace that the sales of hydrogen is virtually guaranteed when the station opens. One of the points of friction is, of course, the cost of the stations and the cost of fuel, right, although the vehicles come with 3 years of fuel when they are sold. The government agencies in California are providing a subsidy to help develop the fueling network, but over time that subsidy will decrease and then disappear altogether. When that subsidy goes away and the market has sufficient traction, we see that as achieving self-sufficiency.
I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a little bit to that.
Oh, please. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, just some quick points. Certainly, there's the light duty market that's driving all this innovation, and I think David correctly points out that really the infrastructure tends to be a key bottleneck that we've learned from building out light duty stations. And really, if we had more of those and could build them out faster, and the cost could come down quicker, you would see the scale and the sales, very quickly from there. And once you're able to achieve some of that scale and the cost beyond just the California market, that's when it's then viable to expand to other markets where maybe the policy and the financial support is not quite as strong.
And that's, I think, for retailers, that's been a big thing, because while the technology seems, as I said earlier, sexy or cool, and it's something different from liquid fuel, the cost of actually doing this to your station when there are no vehicles in your general vicinity might be something that may, cause you to think that twice. But let me ask this, make sure I understood you correctly earlier, James. You mentioned something about how everything starts in California, and that's true, and it kind of moves its way out, but that the heavy duty fuel and their need for that fuel is actually helping to start that infrastructure. So are you saying that the heavy duty needs, because those fleets will actually make money, it's a profit center for them, that they'll actually be the ones that actually build that infrastructure across the country, and that will open up a doorway really for the light duty market in those areas because the stations will be there?
Well, it was a great point that David made earlier, which had to do with what the scale of the vehicles themselves in the light duty sector is what helps you bring down the cost of the fuel cell stacks themselves. So then you can leverage those to have the vehicle side more affordable. But from the fueling perspective, when you look at a Class 8 semi-truck, so these are the largest trucks on the road, totally 80,000 pounds. It is most of our trucking fleet today that's moving freight. That's something that uses at least 40 times the amount of hydrogen per day as a typical light-duty consumer. So really, the volume difference is absolutely massive, and that's the way that you can justify long-term investments. That's how you can get others on board. We now have Shell on board building multiple heavy-duty stations down in the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. So when you start getting interested parties that have the ability to think long-term, think about new hydrogen generation, large stations with lots of high throughput and a lot of hydrogen per day, that's when the cost of that comes down. And then it's easy to then see how that moves across the country, which I think you see with Nikola's plans. So Nikola has kind of a very U.S.-focused wide plan of how you actually move freight throughout the country, again, through kind of on-site electrolysis with technology there. But it's a very similar strategy, growing from California and bringing down the cost because there's such high fuel use.
So it's largely fleet when we're talking. For those who not really familiar with light duty and heavy duty, light duty is essentially passenger vehicles. Heavy duty can be passenger vehicles, I believe. But really, I think you're talking about buses and large trucks that move product, not people. And the idea, I think that's intriguing, is it allows you to build you're able to have not only the supply but the demand by having the fleet there, so you don't have to worry about how many cars are on the road and how many might come to the market. It builds it out there, and then you tell the story that on the side of a bus or side of a truck, powered by fuel cell technology. Right. I know going to the auto shows, they joke, they say you can drink the exhaust. Now, wouldn't that be a commercial to show you drinking a bus exhaust? But that's really some of the interesting applications of the heavy duty, in that the fleet, if you get fleets, you get built-in demand and you move things a little further.
That's right. Yeah, it's quite simple to make the right investments and match and roadmap correctly when you're talking about heavy duty. We're right now have quite a challenge to really match where there's going to be retail customers and where we need stations. It's always a constant challenge to balance the supply and demand from that perspective, because to some degree it's always a bit unknown. What routes are people going to take? What do they expect? Where do they actually want to fuel? From the heavy duty side, if you have a back to base type operation where, they go out, do their thing for the day, and then come back after, 100, 200 miles a day and fuel at the same place and stay at the depot and say they want to build 10 trucks. You can immediately match that from day one and optimize that solution from day one.
So, Dave, either one of you can take this, Dave or James, but our audience is mostly made up of fuel retailers, and they would love to do anything to bring customers to their stores beyond just fuel, but also inside the store. But when it relates to fuel itself, with something like this, with hydrogen, what really is the message you'd want to tell them nationwide, whether they're in California or they're over in Boston? How can you help them to see what's going on in that market or the importance of paying attention?
Absolutely. I would say, first of all, California is demonstrating that this market can exist and now does exist. And the interesting fact about hydrogen is it is a direct drop into the existing business model of dispensing gasoline and diesel fuel, in that you're dealing with a fueling nozzle and you plug the fueling nozzle into the vehicle. You're dealing with a compressed gas, but it's not like plugging a vehicle into an outlet. The dispensing occurs in a time frame that's similar to fueling a gasoline vehicle. So from the customer perspective, what industry is working on is as transparent a process as possible to match the existing model. Of course, on the development side, there's quite a bit more because you are working with a compressed gas versus a liquid fuel.
Very true, very true. And the perception out there for many when they hear hydrogen may be a negative perception. Those who are old enough to remember certain bad things that have happened, and I won't reference that, but...
I'm not that old.
Not that old? Okay, all right. Well, how have you actually marketed... maybe you guys can't answer this, but I had to know, how do you market it in California to where you're having success in the light duty segment?
From a safety perspective, I think is one thing as you're referencing, and I think part of that just has to do with education. So a lot of times people are afraid of the unknown,
right? And
especially for something that sits in your car, hydrogen is very unknown, right? But as soon as you tell them, hey, this is what it is, and hey, we store it in these pressurized tubes that, by the way, we drop them, light them on fire, and shoot rifles at them, and put them through all these safety tests, which you can actually see all these online.
You have a cool job.
Quite entertaining. Well, I don't get to do that, but I get to watch it and say that we do it, so that's cool enough. I'm close enough to the source, but certainly we want to make sure that the public knows that hydrogen is actually not a new fuel. It is for their car, but hydrogen's been being dealt with for a very long time because it's used to actually refine the gasoline we have today, and also make fertilizer. They're kind of the big two uses. So the industry knows how to deal with it. You just usually don't see it sitting underneath your seat when you're driving around. So I think that's a big piece. And then just kind of the other part as far as marketing the vehicle, we just have to point out the benefits. If you're looking for something to be more environmentally friendly, this is something that really offers you a no-compromise solution. So you can refuel in 3 to 5 minutes, something comparable to gasoline today, and you have 300-plus miles of range, even with the very first retail models out there today. As you see, our vehicle is about 312, and now with the Honda vehicle and Hyundai vehicles at more like 350, 370 miles, that just continues to improve, and also having an SUV platform. So it's really quite easy to sell from the usability perspective, and then it's just the cost. So right now we're covering the cost of fuel to kind of take out that early market perspective, and we certainly see that coming down. And it also gives you the the carpool lanes in California. It's actually a bigger one than you'd expect for a lot of people.
I imagine.
That is actually huge. Just looking at how EVs evolved in Norway, and now close to 50% of traction there, and it's all the conveniences. It's free parking in certain zones. It's tolls, free tolls. It's those conveniences. When those are the things that you brag about. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. And I know that not to interrupt, you were saying something there, David?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the vehicle on the market, just to respond to your market question, the market is in the early adopter stage. So the fuel and the vehicle ownership are very well balanced on the retail side in California, and there's not a lot of marketing that needs to be done except that these early adopters are very passionate about it, and they market the vehicle themselves.
Final two quick questions. First off, James, I'm assuming you drive a Mirai and you have one of those cars. What's the performance like? Does it have the zip that you hear about with electric vehicles, or is it similar to internal combustion engine vehicles, or something else entirely?
It's a good question, and first of all, I do drive one every day, and love doing that. It's kind of nice to be able to drive the technology you're working on and kind of utilize exactly what you're trying to change the world with. So that part is pretty exciting just for me. And I will point out that it is an electric vehicle, so it's still an electric motor that drives the wheels just like you would in a Bolt or a Tesla or anything else. But we certainly aren't designing it as a sports car. So we certainly could put more fuel cell and could put a bigger motor, and it could out-drag a Tesla if we wanted to. We just aren't designing for that market today. So it does have that same instantaneous torque. So you have that very fast acceleration from especially 0 to 30. You can get just about really any performance that you're looking for to get on a standard day, especially when you're stuck in stop-go traffic, using that regenerative braking a lot. So really what I try to do is maximize the fuel economy side of things, which I think is more of a challenge than just, going and dragging an Audi on the road. I guess is a different perspective.
And somebody driving on the road with a smile on their face in that carpool lane. And David, just a quick final question with you. How do we find out more about all of this? What's going on with California? What can retailers do to learn more? And anybody else that wants to learn more about what's going on in California related to fuel cell vehicles?
Absolutely. Well, they can come visit our website, cafcp.org. On that website, on our mobile version, we have the map of all the hydrogen fueling stations in California with real-time information on their status in terms of whether they're dispensing fuel or not. And then I am opening the door for retailers to contact me directly. I'll be happy to facilitate conversations within the industry to producers of vehicles and fuel and developers if individuals are interested in that marketplace as well.
Well, thank you both. The future is here. Mirai. It's just unevenly distributed, but it's happening in California, and it may be happening elsewhere soon. Thank you both for joining us, and thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.